On a spring evening in Washington, D.C., thousands gather for the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It is one of the highest-profile gatherings of the year. Protecting the President of the United States, alongside cabinet members and hundreds of journalists, requires a sprawling, multi-layered security apparatus. At the center of this operation is the Washington Hilton. To secure it, the Metropolitan Police Department manages the exterior street closures and motorcade escorts, while the Secret Service locks down the immediate perimeter around the building. But on this specific night, those formidable exterior barricades were entirely bypassed. The primary threat to the event was already waiting inside the perimeter. The suspect did not have to fight his way through a street-level checkpoint. He simply booked a room. As a registered guest at the hotel, he had legitimate clearance to walk right past the outer security rings. That guest status gave him unimpeded access to the interior lobbies and corridors, placing him dangerously close to the heavily guarded venue on the lower level. This layout shows exactly how that internal access neutralized the exterior defenses. The solid outer ring of police protection became irrelevant, forcing the Secret Service to defend the ballroom from a threat originating squarely within their own secure zone. By 8:36 p.m., the dinner was well underway. That is exactly when the suspect began his descent toward the lower-level ballroom. He came heavily armed. This breakdown illustrates his loadout: a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives. To reach his target, he passed through a narrow bottleneck. This choke point was an inner perimeter Secret Service checkpoint, the absolute last failsafe. Directly behind that checkpoint was the ballroom. Thousands of people, including the president, were seated at these tables, completely unaware of the approaching threat. There were no more layers left. The outcome of the night rested entirely on the officers holding that single interior line. With a firearm in his hand, the suspect suddenly sprinted straight toward the checkpoint. He never crossed the threshold. Secret Service agents and local law enforcement intercepted him immediately at the entrance. A chaotic exchange of gunfire erupted point-blank in the lobby. Inside the ballroom, the sound of those shots echoed through the space. Thousands of attendees dropped their heads and the room went completely silent, as law enforcement immediately took defensive positions over the crowd. Back in the hallway, officers tackled the suspect to the floor and placed him in handcuffs. Despite the exchange of fire, the suspect was not struck by a single bullet. The collision between a heavily armed threat and a multi-layered security detail lasted only seconds. The final physical barrier performed exactly as it was designed to. Following the breach, the protection detail immediately evacuated the president safely back to the White House. One uniformed Division Secret Service officer took a direct hit to the chest during the firefight. Fortunately, the round struck his tactical vest and he survived the impact. First responders rapidly transported both the injured officer and the suspect to local hospitals for evaluation. Within hours, the site shifted from a rescue operation to a massive federal crime scene. The FBI's evidence response team arrived to secure the hotel, collect shell casings, and execute a search warrant on the suspect's room. Neutralizing the active shooter required sheer kinetic force, but processing the aftermath required a highly coordinated handover across multiple federal agencies. The judicial consequences moved swiftly. The suspect was initially hit with 2 federal charges. The first was Title 18, Section 924C, using a firearm during a crime of violence. The second was Section 111, for assaulting a federal officer with a dangerous weapon. Prosecutors immediately noted that as forensic evidence was processed, further charges would be filed. A man armed with a shotgun, a handgun, and multiple knives came within yards of a confined ballroom filled with thousands of unprotected guests. He exploited his hotel access to bypass the outer perimeters, but when he rushed the final checkpoint, the officers holding that single threshold intercepted him, took his fire, and stopped a mass casualty event.